Welcome to Sharp Sharp. We are recording this on Wednesday, the 22nd of July. This is our 17th episode, which is quite a long time. I feel like we've survived the initial couple of weeks. And this is bringing together the powerhouse skills of three media houses. We've got Scrolla's Zukile Majova on my right-hand side. Zux, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Rob?
Good. And Patrick Smith from Africa Confidential. These are three fantastic publications, I have to say. So please read us, subscribe to us, give us hell. That's what we do. So it's fantastic to be here and also listen to this podcast, bookmark it and come back every week. Guys, perhaps we should talk about, as a starting point, South Africa's Public Investment Corporation. Now, this is perhaps the most influential organization in South Africa's economy. It owns about 14% of the stock exchange, 20% of the stock exchange. It invests 1.2 million people's pensions. What it does determines how the economy is shaped. It invests more in a particular share. That share goes up. It buys government bonds. It has an impact on that. It's massively important, but it's been riven by chaos in the last couple of weeks. The CEO was suspended last week. We had a cover story in Currency in the Financial Mail calling it Hollywood. The PIC goes to Hollywood because everyone is in acting position. 5 of the top 6 positions are in acting positions. So it's really falling apart there. Zux, the PIC is very important, not just for government pensioners, but certainly as an indicator of what's happening in the economy, right? I mean, this is an important structural issue, the fact that it's so unstable.
Listening to you, Rob, now I'm thinking this is a big company. It's a massive company. 3.7 trillion rand in investment in what it manages. It's massive. And the number of government employees, I don't know if it needs to be broken down into 2 companies. It's huge, But also, what is quite interesting, especially with the latest scandal, is the power that it has been given to those who approve PIC deals. For instance, a BE partner wants to buy 25% of Lanseria Airport. No bank wants to touch a deal like that, especially if it's not clear how it's going to be, the money is going to be repaid. It's going to be repaid on dividends only, and when you default there, what happens? We're talking about a lot of money here, Rob.
Yeah.
And the PIC takes those risks, and increasingly, you can see a lot of money is getting lost all the time. It's not just once, Rob. I mean, in 150 deals, about 78 to 80 of those deals, the money got lost. In some cases,
all unlisted companies. Yeah,
all of the money got lost. A lot of work needs to be done there, Rob. There was a commission before this current crisis, which we thought was going to sort things out, and it looks like it hasn't sorted things out.
That's exactly it. I mean, the Empathy Commission was commissioned by Cyril Ramaphosa, who said you need to find out what the problem is here, and it came back with 308 recommendations, of which all of them have been pretty much implemented, except for one crucial one, which is that a politician should not chair the PIC. And that's the one the ANC seems reluctant.
That's a big problem.
Exactly. So now you have a situation where you have the Deputy Finance Minister chairing the PIC, and he's arguing with the finance minister who's outside of it. So there's political meddling right the way down, and this is what's crippling the organization. The PIC's problem historically has been that it invested in companies because of, they were friends of the president, Jacob Zuma, back then. There was Air Energy in elsewhere in Africa. There was Daybreak Farms. There's so many deals that happen for the wrong reasons, and that's exactly why you don't want politicians involved in our big institutions. But Zux, I mean, that's been the problem.
In this particular situation, Rob, you've got 2 very powerful politicians within the ANC Finance and Economic Desk. That is David Masondo and the current Minister of Finance. So from an ANC perspective, they both see themselves as almost as equals. It's going to be very difficult for someone to intervene in a quarrel that involves these 2 in terms of ANC dynamics. And that's where the problem is. Obviously, the previous commission recommended that there should be no politician in the first place chairing the PIC. So those are the problems. So you've got somebody who is the deputy minister, but politically doesn't see himself really as a deputy to the finance minister. A lot of people are starting to say he actually should be the next finance minister. So you can imagine it's going to be very difficult to actually manage this particular situation. But also the PIC itself is seen largely as some kind of a political potato that people want to use to fund this, to fund that.
A piggy bank.
Whoever comes in wants to use it to finance a number of deals that they owe to friends or people who put them in power. It looks like this is going to continue, Rob.
So last week, I mean, just what happened last week is the CEO, Patrick Lamini, was suspended. He's only been there for a year, and a whistleblower report emerged. Now, I think that in a lot of our state institutions, whistleblower reports are misused to get rid of people who are politically inconvenient. And in this case, this speaks exactly to the political tensions, because the minister, Niño Godongwana, the finance minister, wanted Patrick Lamini to stay. He'd only been there a year. David Masondo, his deputy, believed he should go, and he was on the board that voted to suspend him. So that, in a sense, really crisply illustrates the tensions. And then you had the directors who supported the CEO and said he shouldn't be suspended resigning last week. This week, 4 more directors resigned, and now the finance minister says, I'm going to dissolve the board entirely and create a new board next week. Now, this is just, I mean, optically, it's a terrible thing for the largest investor in Africa to be undergoing this sort of trauma.
Yeah, I mean, the board is effectively walked out. Whether the minister dissolves it or not, the scandal is out there. Actually, the quicker they handle the scandal and actually be seen to be on top of it, the better. I mean, if you postpone meetings to the end of this month or even next month, then the scandal continues to go, and the damage can be extensive, Rob. And again, we're talking about the same thing I'm telling you about the political dynamics in the ANC. We're going towards conference as well. You got these 2 powerhouses within the finance sector, the finance desk within the ANC, and both of them, they think they're powerful. Remember, the finance minister comes from the powerful backing of the Eastern Cape as a province, which is a very, very powerful province in terms of numbers. Now that KZN is no longer that strong in the ANC, and main backers of President Cyril Ramaphosa, the premier, who's the chairperson, who's been re-elected and wants to be elected again for the 3rd term, Oscar Mabuya, and he remains, at least his faction remains very powerful in the Eastern Cape. That's where Godongwana comes from. That's where his background is. So he remains quite powerful. But there's also a Masondo clique within the ANC that sees him as the next finance minister. So and apparently the game is playing out at PIC.
It's fascinating because, you have a situation where both parties, the 2 of the largest parties, the ANC and the DA, have had their own issues in the last couple of weeks, and both of them have been internally driven. The DA has been at war with itself because of what the former leader, John Steenhuisen, has said about the current leader, the new leader, Jordan Hill-Lewis, that he was betrayed and knifed in the back, and this has caused a lot of tension within the DA and blamed Tony Leon, one of the earlier leaders, for a form of state capture. And in this situation, you have 2 of the top minds in the finance department of the ANC at war with each other. You don't actually need the other parties to be creating the tension. These parties can do it all by themselves.
Look, Rob, we're talking about the structure of the GNU right here in terms of actual administration of the PIC. The GNU could have helped had the structure been proper. Get a strong DA minister. Just have 1 deputy minister, but very, very strong within the management of treasury and the finance and all of that. You'd find yourself in a different position. Right now, we've got an ANC fight happening in a very important institution. Like I said, 3.7 trillion rand. It sounds like a lot of cash.
It'd be great to bring in Patrick at this point. I mean, Patrick, you've seen so many instances of different countries being racked by, I suppose, political fights over the big pot of money, whether it's kind of a sovereign fund or a large pot of pensions in some other countries. I mean, what kind of lessons have you learned from this across the continent? That why does it keep repeating itself perpetually?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very tempting for governments to find a way of dipping into these national piggy banks. We've also seen it in the private sector. I don't know if any of you remember a guy called Robert Maxwell, who used to own the Daily Mirror Group in London, found the pension fund rather irresistible to his financial transactions. I think, it's important in many ways. I mean, as Zux was saying, I mean, in dollar terms, the PIC's got $142 billion worth of assets. That makes it, one of the biggest in the world. In African terms, the next biggest is Morocco with 33 billion. After that, interestingly enough, it's Namibia with 16.4 billion. And that is a genuine pension fund in Namibia. And it's been managed pretty well so far, as has the Moroccan one. Then we get into more questionable territory with something called the Mutapa Investment Fund, which we may be talking about later. That is essentially a sovereign wealth fund, but the government kind of represents it as a kind of fund, state-controlled fund. In fact, it's controlled by President Mnangagwa, of all the state assets. So it's rolled all the state-owned enterprises into it. And apparently, elements of pension funds as well. So I think there's real governance concerns over that. The Nigeria one is relatively small, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It's 13.6 billion. Yeah, Nigeria is, vying with South Africa as, being one of the biggest economies on the continent. And it's had a succession of bad management decisions. They've kicked out, just like the PIC, they've kicked out the boss, and the directors have walked out. It now seems to be run better, partly because one of your South African financial ventures, the Stanbic IBTC, is involved in running it. So they solved the problem by trying to privatize it. And then, in theory, the private company should be answerable to its shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. But the rest of them, I was in Ghana as a correspondent many years ago at something called the Social Security and National Insurance Trust, which now has about $6 billion. That was, heading south. And it's a really sensitive issue. One of the things is when you get economies where there's a lot of devaluation and currency instability, exchange rate instability, people think, well, where are funds being invested? But I think the final take on this for me would be, we've had a year of people looking at financial institutions in Africa and saying, look, we have to find a way to generate our own resources to invest in infrastructure and all the rest of it, because the capital flows are just not coming in sufficient quantities from the rest of the world. The way we do that are the pension funds and the central bank gold reserves. And something like the PIC story resonates very badly when you hear sort of African finance ministers and central bank governors going to international financial institutions and saying, we've got pension funds and we're going to invest those in bonds to build up, coffers for development, and you've got this sort of crisis coming up. So I think it's got to be managed really carefully to avoid sending pretty disastrous signals.
Part of the problem is that you have decisions made for political reasons. You had, it's one thing to invest your PIC, your pension money, in good ventures that will build the country's infrastructure. It's another to do it to bail out a friend of the president. And that's been the problem, is that you saw it at the PIC, where Aaron Energy, who was, well known to Jacob Zuma, they got money from this institution. That is what creates a credibility crisis. So when you do decide to invest money for build bridges and do legitimate projects, the credibility's gone. So it's about insulating the politicians away from these pots of money, right? There needs to be governance processes to separate anyone who needs the money from the people who have it. Do you feel that's too cynical, Patrick?
No, I think you're 100% right. Look, I think it's also a kind of survival instincts for governments, because there is a capital drought in Africa. This so-called infrastructure gap of variously rated at between, $150 billion to $200 billion a year. The whole idea, according to the African Development Bank and the World Bank, was to build up national resources in capital markets through pension funds and other holdings to fill that gap. It's got to be ruthlessly apolitically run. I'm slightly surprised about the PIC thing. I know you were following the Anglo-De Beers shenanigans, Rob. And people were saying, well, the PIC's got, I think, the biggest single holding in Anglo. And so when the Australians, BHP, were targeting it, they belatedly tried to court PIC. And I believe at the time, I don't know if I'm wrong, Masondo was part of that decision, he was saying absolutely no, if the deal is good, if what BHP is offering is a good market deal, we'll go with it. We're not going to take a political position on this, which I thought was interesting because, I mean, Masondo is deputy finance minister. You can't get much more political than that. But he was saying it's up to the market. And I don't know if that was just a sort of a game or he was serious about that. And it kind of conveyed a view that the PIC is, it has got some arm's length from government, but maybe that's not really the case.
I mean, my impression, having spent a while with both David Masondo and Niño Godongwana, is that both of them are fairly market-oriented, and I feel like they would make the best decisions for the best market decisions as opposed to political decisions. So they both seem on target on that point. But equally, they're now split and at loggerheads over the PIC, and I think optically at least, you have to have a division between the politicians and the people running your state entities. So, it's fine to have a rule. It's fine when you have someone like David Masondo chairing it, who is actually quite sober and rational and is likely to make the right decisions. But the point is, if you allow this as a rule, then next time you have somebody else who's not like that. So you need to have a rule that fits this particular scenario, right, Zooks? I mean, you think that's a fair thing to say?
Yeah, absolutely. The recommendation from the previous commission was spot on. Remove politicians from this kind of situation. Obviously, the way the PIC now looks, it's like you can borrow money, repay it if you can. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. It's almost like getting money from the NYDA. If you return the money, good. If not, nothing happens to you. We were in a situation like that, as I was saying, that 78 deals and the money never came through, and we are not seeing people in orange uniforms in jail.
To shift slightly on this point, I mean, Ramaphosa was the person who instituted a commission of inquiry into the PIC, which came back with recommendations, and it said, we'll fix this, we'll never be back here. Here we are in 2026 with the same governance problems. It illustrates how so much of what Ramaphosa talked about and sold to the public has been dismantled and has fallen flat. I mean, this has created kind of a disillusionment with Ramaphosa when it comes to business. Sooks. I mean, there have been stories this week we ran on currency about how the business sector seems to have shifted its belief system, such as it is, to the GNU as the center of hope, as opposed to President Ramaphosa. I mean, it's an indication that so much of these dreams are falling flat. The police, the prosecution service, the PIC, we look like we've just treaded water for a decade.
Rob, it's never a good thing to say you didn't vote, because we want people to vote. But I never voted during the Zuma years, and I got to vote when the Ramaphosa promise came true. It was a big promise. We were in hell with state capture. A lot of money was just being not even stolen, it's just open looting. It's just open fair game. Every department was going to hell. And Ramaphosa promised a new dawn, but also everybody knew Ramaphosa's background. The country has respected him for years. Where he comes from, Nelson Mandela's choice for a future leader, his work in terms of crafting the Constitution. We know that he's somebody who respects the Constitution, will respect its implementation. We thought he would really be disgusted by corruption. But also he's got money of his own when you compare to the previous president and all of that. We didn't expect that Ramaphosa was going to take 250 million rand to build himself a similar to Nkandla villa like we had. So all of those things were like, okay, now we're going to get South Africa back on track. And it hasn't happened. Largely, it hasn't happened. Well, there's been a stopping of state capture, which is a huge achievement in terms of where it was going. Even if you look at the police commission that's happening now, the Madlanga Commission, which is basically a commission inside the police. Police got a huge contracts that are just not managed properly. Also, the secret funds that are used for police investigations and sources, SAPS intelligence and all of that, But broadly, Ramaphosa hasn't worked as quickly as we thought he would, at least to stop the rot, turn the country around on a new path. It hasn't happened as quickly as we wanted.
Patrick, I wanted to ask you this, because the view of President Ramaphosa outside the country, I suppose in this country people are very impatient. You want change to happen. Instead, you've seen unemployment go from 26.7% when he came into power to 32%, 33%. Indicates we're slipping backwards.
Yeah.
Is it just that South Africans are just too impatient and that it just takes longer to unravel a broken economic system?
I think I think you're totally justified in being impatient when you've got a situation with over 50% of the young people not finding decent, sustainable work. The only, well, there's no justification. Perhaps one should look around at other developing economies. I mean, right next door to Namibia, to South Africa is Namibia. The youth unemployment is skyrocketing there. Much smaller economy, but much smaller population. It is skyrocketing there. You look at Brazil, which is regarded as one of the great, well, was regarded as one of the great development success stories under Lula and so on. Lula's back there. Unemployment is still skyrocketing there. Even in Indonesia. So it's not that South Africa's, well, it's exceptionally bad, I think, on the youth unemployment scores. But I think that is the worst indicator in a way, because it's a sort of stealing of hope from people. If they don't see the prospect of sustainable jobs in the future, then what the hell do they do? But just a sort of a slightly connected aside with the international opinion is that the new British Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, is said to be considering a wealth tax. And he's being advised by a couple of French leftist economists on this. And, a lot of people would say, about time we tax the super rich. But just in a feather in Ramaphosa's cap may be that it was Ramaphosa who made a big deal of this last year at the G20, the one that Donald Trump wouldn't attend, and said, let's have a wealth tax. We've got to do something about the amount of generational wealth that is being shifted from extremely rich people in the past and present to people, their kids, who are going to be extremely rich people in the future without any public intervention, any taxation. And I get a sense, actually, that is one issue where Ramaphosa is coming down on the right side. But again, I know it's incredibly contested in South Africa, and there's a view that the tax base is just shrinking and shrinking in South Africa. The more you whack up the rates, the smaller it's going to get. So, I mean, I guess, it's going to be another area where his views are going to be strongly opposed.
I also have a sense that Ramaphosa did pretty well, even if this was a distraction from local issues, on Israel and Gaza. And I think that's a view that has gained credibility more so throughout the world in the last couple of years. So in a sense, South Africa did lay down the precedent for it, and it was hugely contested. And obviously America disliked the ICJ case, but it does form a center of some kind of moral leadership around Israel in the world.
You can say that. It doesn't really help us. If we're going to get enemies as powerful as America,
that's true.
It doesn't really help.
But you have to have a moral sense.
From a moral point, yes, what was happening in Gaza was inexcusable. They had gone way too far. For me, I actually, Rob, think I can forgive Ramaphosa and the GNU if they were appointing a lot of competent people, and it will just be the global geopolitics that are affecting our growth. But they are not. I mean, if you get an opportunity to replace a bad minister, and then you replace a bad minister with a minister who's worse, who's got a track record that is worse, and social development, for instance, we've got Dina Pule. She's bad news, really bad news. And Ramaphosa has appointed her. Everybody disagrees. That's where you lose opportunities. We understand Ramaphosa did not win the ANC conference 100%, so he was never going to come out as powerful as he would have wanted. He would inherit some dead wood, if you would. But when an opportunity comes through, you replace those with very competent people, and he has not been very good at that.
I mean, I suppose as well, like you say, there's global factors, external factors, and if you're managing the internal factors badly, when something hits you from outside, like the Iran war, for example, or we've had this story recently about a super El Niño coming to wreak havoc with Africa's agricultural sector. I mean, how serious is that as a potential external force?
That's going to be huge. I was quite interested to know that we've got a new agriculture minister now. One wants to see what plans it's going to have in place, because at least it's got time now to actually plan what's going on. And the difficulty with new ministers is the ability to fight for finance. It needs to fight for finance, for the main commercial farmers, but also for the small guys.
Small farmer. You're a small farmer, right?
Well, in South African context, I wouldn't regard myself as a farmer. But yeah, we're small holdings. And if you hear of an El Nino that's going to hit between October and March next year, if you are producing maize, that's very complex. Because right now, Rob, with the weather changes and all of that, there's been an opportunity along the Eastern Cape, along the coastline, that you could now produce maize twice in one cycle. That is, you would produce maize between October and December. That is fresh corn. A lot of people in the Eastern Cape are buying fresh corn and cooking it and selling it in the streets. It's quite popular, So by December, you slash out all your corn, take the stock for cattle feed and all of that. You make money from that, and then you plant new maize. By March, your maize is good and ready for yellow maize produce and all of that. We were harvesting in June. Good maize. So you could produce 2 crops and make a lot of money. But now with the kind of you're talking about, I'm really, really worried.
Patrick, I wanted to ask about the impact of the El Nino across the continents as well, because there's something like, is it 22 high-risk countries that stand to be affected? Agriculture is a massive part of Africa's wider economy, and there's all these historical reasons for it, like not diversifying enough, but commodities are massive, and this is a big deal.
It's huge. As you said, that 22 countries figure out of 54, that comes from the latest initiative by the World Food Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization, these UN bodies in Rome, who are really panicking. I've got a good friend actually who works at the World Food Programme, and she was saying that they have lost 2/3 of their staffing around the world since the US, but also the European aid cuts last year. So essentially what's happening is we are entering into a period of climate pressure, the worst we've known in hundreds of years, with a dysfunctional, a collapsing international humanitarian system. They just don't have the resources to deal with this. They're trying to raise $220 million. But that, if you look at the countries around the world, it's not just Africa, it's also Southeast Asia and South Asia, because the actual problem is coming, the climatic meteorological problem is coming from the east, sweeping across Africa. So it's going to hit the farming and agricultural systems of all those countries. It's absolutely massive. But it's also a layering on other crises. So you see places like the Horn of Africa, and East Africa, where virtually every country except Kenya is involved in dealing with some sort of insurgency or political contestation, violent political contestation. Ethiopia, Sudan, the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world, is going to get hit by El Niño, and as people were trying to recover from those areas, the rich farmlands of the Nile Valley and so on, they're going to get hit by this drought. So it is, it can't be overstated how serious this stuff is, because it's overlaying not just climate change, not just local conflicts, but of course also the socio-economic effects of the US-Iran war, which have whacked up transportation costs, they've whacked up fertilizer costs and shipments in both directions. So it's become harder for African countries to get their fertilizers and fuel into their economies, but it's also become harder for them to export to the markets they want to reach. So on both counts, the Iran war has been pretty bad for that. But if you layer El Nino on top of that, you've got a growing crisis without any sign that the international system is taking it seriously in terms of money. I mean, 220 million compared with the, shall we say, the SpaceX IPO is less than a drop in the ocean. It's less. It's not even a teacup in the ocean.
And it's far more tangible African agriculture as opposed to some rockets on Mars. I mean, that's a different world.
You'd think so, but there may be, the plan is to sort of to do away with El Niños by all moving to Mars.
Well, I mean, certainly, Zooks, I mean, it does indicate that you might have to quit farming, go into a thriving industry like media. Oh, no, wait, I'm thinking of something else. Media is not the thriving industry you should go into. As a final point, guys, I mean, talking of dysfunctional economies and countries, we have a huge resurgence in Zimbabwe. Air Zimbabwe is flying to London. Is that right, Patrick? I mean, Air Zimbabwe is resuming flights to London.
Yes, it is. It's a headline event because there are a lot of Zimbabweans, as you know, living in South Africa, 3 million or so. But there's also quite a few in Europe, maybe 1 million or more, and the US. And they, sorely miss the old regular Air Zimbabwe flights from London to Harare. So Mnangagwa's government has managed to engineer a return of Air Zimbabwe. Well, sort of, because it's not quite a return of Air Zimbabwe, because essentially it's an outfit calling itself Air Zimbabwe, but it's run by, lo and behold, the Mutapa investment fund, the sovereign wealth fund we were talking about earlier, which is absolutely under Mnangagwa's private control, and no one can see the minutes of the decisions about funding and the sources of funding, but all we know is that it controls about $16 billion worth of state assets, and now it's added to his portfolio this airline, and it will be launching flights. It's 6 months late, but it's better late than never. It's being run by, the initiative is being run by a guy called John Mungudia, who used to be the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and because of his good service, he was moved on to run Mnangagwa's sovereign wealth fund. And the slight problem with the partner they've chosen, it's a Spanish airline, and that airline is actually being investigated by the Spanish authority for misuse of COVID funds and laundering money from Venezuela. But apart from that, it seems to be an ideal partner to resuscitate the national airline.
I mean, that's nothing wrong there, right? It looks completely above board.
I was very impressed by that story when I saw it trending on Twitter. I was like, wow, this is nice, But I was always suspicious, like, who's behind it? How did it all happen so quickly? And it sounds so good, and now we're hearing it's not so good.
It sounds like Mnangagwa is taking greater control of the economy by stealth.
Yeah. That's what you privately suspected was going to happen there, But Rob, I was quite impressed to hear that Uganda Airlines has ordered a fleet of 8 new aircraft. That tells you
not the Dreamliners.
4 Dreamliners as well.
That's incredible.
Which is quite impressive. It looks like African air travel is recovering.
Guys, well, that's all we have time for today on Sharp Shop. Please watch us this time on YouTube. We're now on YouTube, which is a fantastic event, and you can watch the Dreamliner team, which is Zooks and Patrick and me, and less me than Patrick and Zooks, obviously. But I'll board your Dreamliner, and catch us again next week, guys.
Sharp.